All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Here on Memorial Day, the 25th day of May. To you and to those on the stream, welcome again. This is Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell. I will be here for an hour this morning, trying to catch up on all the things that need to be done and bring to you an update of world affairs. I don't know what else is lined up for K-Talk today as far as possibilities are concerned. However, we're going to plow forward that long before Russia pulls out some more Oreshnik missiles, which they've done. A very, very dear friend of mine that I've often referred to on this radio show still believes that Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons. Well, gas stations don't launch Oreshnik missiles. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement yesterday, 2 days ago, which pointed the finger directly at NATO for their role in what they described as the barbaric attack on the Starobelsk trade school in Lugansk People's Republic, killing 18 teenagers and wounding dozens more as they slept in their dormitories in the early hours of May 22nd. It was a targeted strike against civilians straight out of the German Nazi playbook, said the Russian official statement. No one in that building was involved in any hostilities, nor could they have been. There are no military facilities anywhere near that college. These strikes, this is the Russian response. These strikes use long-range weapons supplied to the Kyiv regime by NATO countries, including drones, and are being carried out with the technical assistance of foreign specialists from well-known NATO member states. We have reliable information that Western capitals are feeding intelligence to the Ukrainian armed forces and helping with targeting. So the Russian Foreign Ministry called for an emergency session of the UN Security Council to discuss the matter and demanded that all international organizations, national governments, and the global community to resolutely condemn the brutal terrorist attack in Starobelsk. Now, silence, of course, would be tantamount to complicity in the bloody acts of the Kyiv terrorists and the indifference to the fate of the innocent children who've been killed and injured, said the Russian Foreign Ministry. Now, at that emergency session that was held on May 22nd, Russian permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, denounced the attack and Western silence and complicity, turning a blind eye to these crimes and covering them up. Now imagine you sitting there at this emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, and you are the representative for the Russian Federation, talking about how, regardless of what Ukraine thinks of the Lugansk area, Lugansk is now an independent entity, the Lugansk People's Republic, and you are there representing them, and nobody else on the UN Security Council was saying a word. How would you take that? Nobody else is sitting there pounding the table with their fists, denouncing this terrible attack on 16 teenagers. Russia's permanent mission to the UN in Geneva has demanded that the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, Volker Turk, and his office publicly condemn the Kyiv regime's drone attack. A spokesman for Turk's office said later that they were aware of the reports about a strike on a vocational school in Terobez, but were trying to get more information. Yes, of course. What school? What Terobez? What Lugansk People's Republic? So Russian President Putin, in his remarks 2 days ago to the alumni of the Times of Heroes education program, described the Ukrainian school, the attack at the Starobelsk trade school, which had just happened, as an act of terrorism. He stressed that there were no military installations nearby, nor was it the result of debris falling from an air interception. He said the strike was deliberate. It was carried out in 3 waves. involving 16 UAVs, all directed at the same location. Naturally, we will investigate the details and they will be thoroughly examined. Appropriate conclusions will be drawn, however, it is clear to us, and it is once again made evident, who we are dealing with, whom we are fighting against, and what we are fighting for. This constitutes a manifestation of neo-Nazism. It once again serves to confirm the terrorist nature of the Kyiv regime. Putin also stated that he recognized that this was yet another attempt to provoke Russia and then blame it for the consequences. He said the Kyiv regime clearly needs crimes like this. They need them to distract attention from what is happening at the front, inside the country, to try to provoke a reaction from Russia. And then we know this, and we've seen it many times before, blame everything on us, on Russia, on our country. All the escalation, all the consequences of these crimes. I repeat, we have been here many times before. So Putin described Ukraine's disintegration. He says the situation on the battlefield for the Ukrainian forces is gradually going from difficult and critical to catastrophic. Western aid is not helping them. It gets stolen on a regular basis. They just cannot help themselves. He said neither is forced mobilization, where they snatch people off the streets like stray dogs and throw them on the front line. On that note, desertion is also rising. This is still Putin speaking. Catastrophically for the enemy. It is becoming widespread. And what makes things even worse for the ruling elite is the all-consuming corruption that is rotting society from within. That is why they then help each other flee the country, seeking refuge in Israel and elsewhere abroad. He then explained the actions of the Russian government would take. He said, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been instructed to inform the international organizations and the international community about this crime. But of course, you and I both understand that in cases like this, we cannot limit ourselves to statements from the Foreign Ministry. That is why the Ministry of Defense has been ordered to submit its proposal, clearly implying that a retaliation is being planned. So, I have more to say on that because they did retaliate. And I'll get to that in just a few moments, but I wanted to mention Iran first. President Trump went all over the news media 2 days ago, Saturday, declaring a breakthrough peace would be announced by yesterday afternoon. But if that doesn't happen, the United States is going to blow Iran to kingdom come. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Then he told CBS News that negotiations for the United States and Iran are getting a lot closer. This is right after he said he was going to blow them to kingdom come. To finalize an agreement between the two countries, Trump said that if the U.S. and Iran do not come to an agreement, we're going to have a situation where no country will ever be hit as hard as they're about to be hit. And in a separate interview with Axios, and I don't trust anything that comes out of Axios, mind you, Barack Ravid said that Trump said it was a solid 50-50 as to whether he'd be able to make a good deal or else blow them to kingdom come. In neither interview would Trump get into the details about the potential agreement other than to say that he believed that it would prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. The same old BS, gosh, I wish I could really say the word, that keeps coming out of the Oval Office regarding Iranian nuclear weapons. So both the CBS and Axios reports were indicating that Trump had not yet made a decision and was still consulting with advisors and foreign leaders. But earlier Saturday, Trump held a conference with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Pakistan, on what's going on with Iran. He said the call was very positive, good progress is being made. Yeah, probably while they're telling Trump, no, you can't use our airspace, quit asking. Anyway, Trump's accounts late Friday were pointing in the opposite direction because Trump convened a meeting with his senior national security team on the war with Iran on Friday morning. This is what Axios reported. Trump is seriously considering launching new strikes against Iran, barring a last-minute breakthrough on negotiation, sources who have spoken directly with the president say. Present at this meeting, and remember the big hubbub, the big meeting that took place over the weekend at the White House, all kinds of things were canceled. And when President Trump cancels a golf date, you know it's important. Trump is seriously considering launching new strikes against Iran, barring last-minute breakthrough in negotiations. Present at the meeting were Vice President Vance, Secretary of War Hegseth, CIA Director Ratcliffe, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and other officials attended the meeting along with Trump's Secretary of State Rubio. Joint Chiefs Dan Kane were both out of town. Several hours after this meeting, the White House announced a change in Trump's schedule for the weekend, of course. He canceled plans to spend the weekend at his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club, staying in Washington instead. He also canceled plans to attend his Don Jr.'s wedding due to circumstances pertaining to government and my love for the United States of America. I feel it's important for me to remain in Washington, D.C. at the White House during this important period of time, he put on Truth Social. Then also, I want to get to Russia's retaliation because I want to spend some time on it. But The Economist, which was the mother of U.S. News World Report, a May 22nd commentary on Tulsi Gabbard said this. Tulsi Gabbard's exit from the Trump administration weakens MAGA's anti-war faction, but asserts that she had already been relatively isolated in the government and that her departure will not signal major changes. Her resignation shows how little influence such voices wield around Donald Trump. She had cut an increasingly lonely figure sidelined from most major decisions, yet her departure comes as Mr. Trump weighs up whether to restart a war on Iran that Mrs. Gabbard has long opposed. Then The Economist said this, in practice, Mrs. Gabbard's departure will make little difference to policy making. She was out of the loop. She did not belong to Mr. Trump's core group of advisors on national security and military matters. It was telling that when American forces swooped into Venezuela in January, Ms. Gabbard had previously spoken against such intervention. In private, many career intelligence officials say they are relieved that Ms. Gabbard is gone. Well, MI6, of course, is undoubtedly relieved as well to have her gone because she was getting in the way of the British design. But it's the poor lady, now, honestly, I want you to think for a second. If you were the president of the United States and you were watching these kinds of things take place, and you had a cadre of advisors around you, do you want a bunch of yes people? Wouldn't you want a few people who, even if you sincerely disliked them, but from their point of view, they made a lot of sense, even though it didn't support your viewpoint? Wouldn't you want to hear it? Wouldn't you want to hear why you shouldn't do something that would have such consequence that thousands would be killed as a result of it? Wouldn't you want somebody to try and talk you out of it, even if you were dead sure in favor of it? I don't know. Well, the Russians responded. Usually they wait a little while, don't they? Well, Russia launched its attack Sunday night or Saturday night for the Starobilsk trade school massacre that took place the day before, Friday, May 22nd. And this is from the Russian Federation. In response to terrorist attacks launched by Ukraine against civilian objects in Russia, the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Now, notice they say that against civilian objects in Russia. Well, Lugansk People's Republic considers themselves now, as they voted for it, since the majority of them are Russian anyway, to become part of the Russian Federation, regardless of whether Kyiv recognizes it or not. All right, let me start back at the beginning of that quote. In response to terrorist attacks launched by Ukraine against civilian objects in Russia, the armed forces of the Russian Federation carried out a massive strike by Oreshnik ballistic missiles, Iskander air-launched ballistic missiles, Kinzhal hypersonic air-launched ballistic missiles, and Zircon cruise missiles, air, sea, and ground-based cruise missiles, as well as attack unmanned aerial vehicles against military command and control facilities, air bases, and the enterprises of the Ukrainian defense industry. Was there anything there that they didn't hit? So the Russian Defense Ministry said, and this was issued mid-Sunday, the targets were defeated, all the assigned facilities were neutralized. The Russian Emergencies Ministry announced late May 23rd that it had completed search operations at the Starobilsk Trade School dormitory with the recovery of the last 5 bodies from under the rubble, bringing the death toll to 21. Search operations in Starobilsk at the site of the dormitory collapse have been completed. All the bodies of the victims have been recovered from the rubble. A later Russian statement indicated that among the targets hit on May 24th during the strike in Kyiv and Kyiv region were facilities of the Ukrainian defense industry, military infrastructure, as well as command posts of the General Command of the Ukrainian Ground Forces, the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and other command posts of the AFU. No strikes are planned or carried out against civilian infrastructure of the Ukraine, which is the way it's been. I mean, the West has learned a lot from Israel and the IDF. Just assassinate people. Just kill the people. If you kill enough of the people, those who are left alive will sue for peace. Was this another red line? How many red lines are left? But you did you hear what I said? A massive strike by Oreshnik ballistic missiles, Iskander air-launched ballistic missiles, Kinzhal hypersonic air-launched ballistic missiles, and Zircon cruise missiles, and air and sea and ground-based cruise missiles, as well as attack unmanned aerial vehicles against the military command and control facilities, air bases, and enterprises of the Ukrainian defense industry. Holy smoke. I wonder, speaking of smoke, I wonder if the smoke is still rising. This is just a little bit incredible, isn't it? I mean, what was left? What's left for them to hit? I mean, we're just inches away from catastrophe. And we're spending billions on this. We're just spending billions on this. Even if the Iranian conflict fortuitously ended tomorrow, a huge if, humankind will not be out of the woods yet. Because Ukraine, that's egged on by its desperate European sponsors, is recklessly escalating assaults on civilian Russian targets. The Russians are hitting military targets. At the beginning of this aggressive war by the United States and Israel against Iran, February 28th, Iran responded by hitting military targets. Within 1 hour of the beginning of the war, the United States Tomahawk missiles burned alive over 160 young women in that school attack. I don't know if you've seen that video on the internet of that former U.S. Marine inside the destroyed school in Iran, showing what happened, showing the craters, where the attacks occurred, all the burning. How many times, the West just keeps hitting Russian civilian targets with this unmistakable intent, obviously of provoking Russia's reaction in a wider war, ironically, precisely the time that the leading Western narratives underpinning this bloody meat grinder now stands exposed as utterly fraudulent. Completely. How many times have you heard Americans use the phrase, Russia's unprovoked invasion? Recently declassified UK documents blow that fakery to smithereens because they quote, this is just recently released. I don't know if it's FOIA released documents. I'm not sure exactly how they were released, but they're in the press. And they quote British diplomats assuring their Russian counterparts in February of 1997 that NATO would not offer membership to ex-Soviet republics like Ukraine, because this would understandably aggravate Moscow. So the British then Prime Minister John Major repeated that formulation 1 month later, consistent with the solemn 1990 U.S. pledge from George H.W. not to expand NATO 1 inch eastward in exchange for Soviet non-interference with German reunification. And so in ripping those promises to shreds, if that doesn't constitute a provocation, then I don't know that any word has any meaning left. And similarly, how often have we been told that charging Kyiv with harboring neo-Nazis is just Russian propaganda? Yet on May 19th, Zelensky obtained the remains of one Andrei Melnik for reburial in Ukraine as a national hero, calling him a thorn in the side of the Kremlin. Indeed, he was. He was indeed a thorn in the side of the Kremlin. Melnik joined the German spy service in 1938, cheered on Hitler's 1941 invasion of the USSR, and with the Bukovinian Battalion actively participated in the Holocaust. He even wrote a 1942 pamphlet extolling the Nazi New Order and the crusade against Moscow. And you and I, are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to defend this. It's now gotten way beyond money and weapons. There's growing signs that indicate the Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia not only transit NATO country airspace, but they're being launched from NATO territories. And I think mistaking Putin's patience for weakness would be a monumentally strategic blunder. After what the Russian Federation just did to Kyiv 2 days ago, and the warnings to NATO countries being used to launch air attacks against Russian citizens would place them in the same targeting area as the Ukraine. And after what Russia just did this weekend, if I lived in any of the Latvian countries, even Poland, where Trump just sent 5,000 soldiers, if I were living there and I found out that that country had just recently launched missiles or some kind of artillery that was killing Russian civilians purposely, I think it'd be time to take a vacation to Costa Rica, because we are moving ever closer to the point where Russian retaliation against Kyiv's non-Ukrainian enablers plunges our entire species ever further towards a complete catastrophe. Don't worry about Article 5, because I don't think the nations of Europe will support that. Anyway, last Friday or Thursday, Trump announced that the U.S. is deploying 5,000 troops to Poland. He said that this decision was sparked by the successful election of Poland's president, Nawrocki, whom he was so proud to endorse. But in Poland, how do the Poles feel about that? There's a lot of confusion as to what Trump's announcement really meant, because Polish radio was noting that before last week's decision to halt this planned rotational deployment of one armored brigade combat team, around 10,000 U.S. troops that were stationed in Poland, now instead of rotating them, Trump is adding another 5,000. That would bring that number of U.S. troops inside the borders of Poland to 15,000. But if the 4,000 already halted are factored in, the real figure would be closer to 11,000. But most American media and politicians interpret Trump's announcement not as a net increase, but as a reversal of an earlier reduction, in effect replacing troops rather than adding new ones. So, IAR news agency, Polish radio, describes our president as a leader known for his loose use of figures and his reluctance to acknowledge any mistakes. The report also suggests that this allows him to establish himself as a firm ally of Poland, while drawing little attention to the decision that had previously cast some doubt on that entire alliance. Well, are Ukrainian forces operating out of NATO facilities in NATO countries? If I can put notes together that indicate that, certainly Russian intelligence does. Okay, something else I think you might be interested in here before I get to a general overview. On May 23rd, the Ministry of Communication and Media in the Democratic Republic of the Congo announced on its X account that the number of deaths attributable to Ebola has exceeded 200, and the number of probable infection cases now are close to 900. Uganda has now reported 5 confirmed cases, according to Al Jazeera. So the first alerts of the outbreak began May 5th and May 7th, and then on May 17th, the World Health Organization announced that the outbreaks in the Democratic Republic and Uganda constitute a public health emergency of international concern. Good thing we're not in that treaty, huh? But I'll bet we act as though we are. but has not yet been declared an epidemic, so the U.S. officially withdrew from the WHO by order of President Trump back in January of 2026. Well, the Ebola virus is actually 4 strains. All of them are life-threatening, and they're classified as viral hemorrhagic fevers, something you don't want to get. And it damages the blood vessels. It causes internal bleeding, regardless of the gross presentation of external hemorrhaging. It's the internal hemorrhaging that kills you. And the virus is spread through direct contact with the body fluids of an infected person. So its containment and care of the infected is aggravated by the crowded, unsanitary living conditions in that region of infection, and because of violence, either through ongoing conflicts or, in the case of the DRC, grieving families and others attacking and burning healthcare facilities in reaction to the stringent mandatory measures that are being taken by healthcare personnel to prevent further infection, isolation, and burying the body in sanitary conditions. These often run counter to their culture, involving mourning and burial traditions, which typically bring the body of the deceased into their home so that the mourners may touch or embrace the corpse as they say their final goodbye. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about embracing a corpse that just died from hemorrhagic fever consistent with Ebola infection? But that's their culture. Anyway, the United States Department, the U.S. State Department, just announced it had mobilized $23 million in bilateral foreign assistance. I don't know what bilateral foreign assistance is. Anyway, unless it's, maybe that means it's matched by foreign assistance, and they'll put up $23 million to immediately bolster each country, Angola and Congo, with a swift response. But needless to say, that's a far cry from what's really needed to fight a disease whose spread threatens tens of thousands more in the short term. We were all kind of wondering, at least I think we were all kind of wondering, weren't we? What the next pandemic was going to be. Well, we're still sitting here on a multifaceted powder keg. We have 2 regional wars which could go out of control and become a global nuclear war, both of them. And that is what should, I suppose, motivate us to carry through with whatever plans you have for the rest of 2026. I know what my plans are. And it has been my absolute conviction since the outbreak of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago, that if this is not settled quickly, as was demonstrated by this last weekend, with this incredible artillery pounding of Kyiv by Russian missiles that were not shot down, were not diverted from their paths, their trajectories by radio jamming, were not intercepted by land-to-air interceptors like THAAD or Patriot systems. They all arrived, just as they were targeted, to various defense and military centers inside Kyiv. What's next? Now there's this UN Security Council meeting, this open session emergency special session. And then this I think it's 26th, isn't that tomorrow? 26th through the 28th or something like that. This important UN meeting that's going on. It's going to be chaired by Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. And they're going to start off with a report of the condition in the world, which of course is tortured by how many armed conflicts do you think are going on this planet right now? I always like trivia questions. How many armed conflicts as defined by the UN as an armed conflict? You know, that's not just you and your neighbor tossing dog crap back and forth across the fence. Armed conflict, bullets flying, cannons firing, whatever else. How many armed conflicts are going on around the planet right now? 60. Not 59, 60. And it just kind of gives you a sense in that the world is in such absolute disarray. Now, there is this proposal before the UN, this revised version of the 2010 Tehran Agreement, which was agreed upon by Turkey, Iran, and Brazil, several components, would propose an architecture whereby Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia would be part of the guarantors of such a peace agreement. It would involve, among other things, the right for Palestinians to have their own state. It would integrate Israel into such a new architecture. It would also have the idea that Iran would deposit its enriched nuclear fuel in Turkey against having the right for the civilian use of nuclear energy. And now it's clear from this information that's being passed around that LaRouche's old Oasis plan from 1975 is gaining ground with what seems to be a very popular means of providing lots of new fresh water to irrigate the entire region of the Middle East. So this comprehensive irrigation program, which has already been implemented successfully by China in their Northwest territories, which has converted hundreds of thousands of acres to agriculturally sound ground. And in doing that, China was able to irrigate a desert area the size of Germany and beyond that. And they have developed all kinds of new technologies, including drop technologies that involve ionization of the atmosphere. As an added feature, one could use the space technology to locate underground lakes and naturally the building of canals from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, and combine that with a system of economic development corridors. There's a chance, and these people are interested in doing it, but of turning the Middle East into a garden. The technology is there, the ability to do it is there, the initiative to do it is there, except there's something in the way. Trump and Netanyahu. Now, you could transform the entirety of Southwest Asia into a huge growing agricultural farm. Right now, it is a huge growing desert. And it's a conceptual approach, of course. Doesn't mean that every detail that's been discussed so far would be the final word as to where the reservoirs would be built, where the massive desalination factories would be built. But what is being proposed is really to have an architecture which means long-term survivability. You can't have long-term survivability in this area without water. Now, you've seen last week, Governor Cox has declared the entire state of Utah in an emergency drought situation. Now, I live somewhere where all the watering stuff is taken care of. But for those of you living in homes, those of you who have farms, those of you who raise alfalfa either for your animals or that you sell, will you get a second cutting? The only way you can have peace, lasting peace, is through development. And the Middle East Development Plan is just one example of this kind of an approach, which has to be taken up for every conflict on the planet. Unfortunately, there is this looming danger. I'm just sitting by the radio waiting to hear of a renewed attack by the U.S. and Israel. And it seems that in a phone discussion between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu apparently exerted flaming hair anxiety on Trump to renew the bombing. Now, there's always the possibility that Trump is just dragging his feet on that. Because either he's finally getting some good advice or he's finally coming to his senses. But that would not stop Israel from doing it by themselves, which would, by necessity, require the United States to join in with them to save them. Now, I wasn't present for this discussion between Netanyahu and Trump. They should have included me. But there were only press reports. And apparently they were very heated debates. And I can only say if this war is not ended soon, the World Food Organization of the United Nations has warned that we are already witnessing the first stage of an agricultural food price shock, which would increase exponentially in the next 6 to 12 months. I just recently bought a couple of pounds of grass-fed hamburger. $10. $10 a pound. Now, I don't want to sound like a Johnny-come-lately here, because I know many of you have already experienced that sticker shock. But this is the first time that in some changes I'm making to my diet, went out and actually bought some grass-fed hamburger. And it was at Harmon's. Harmon's is not known for being the least expensive food source in the valley. $10. And so there's this urgent requirement that something be done to end this war in the Middle East, because in all likelihood, if this continues and this agricultural price food price shock continues as is being declared, in all likelihood leading to famines and for an increase in malnutrition, which will lead to an increase in disease, which will lead to an increase of many people dying. Now, naturally, the world economy could plunge into a depression. McGregor talks a lot about that. Ritter talks a lot about that. The world financial system could blow as a result. There are already warning signs that this could happen. And naturally, one has to always keep in mind what is happening now is not necessarily against what some people would anyway want to happen, the Epstein class. After already, back in the 1980s, there was the project by the Council on Foreign Relations called Project 1980s. And there was about 33 books, books discussing the need to have a controlled disintegration of the world economy for basically, just good old Malthusian reasons. Now, all of those authors went into the Carter administration, and a lot of it started to be implemented. So there are all these crazy geopolitical Malthusian ideas in the background, but that's naturally against the very interests of the global majority. But unfortunately, the Middle East is not the only extremely pressing crisis. The other one, naturally, these continued attacks by Western-backed Ukrainian drones. What's happened this last weekend? And here's the problem. Those drones that the supposedly Ukrainians launched could not have hit their target without the backing of both the United States and British intelligence and missile guidance systems. And so the whole coalition of the willing, France, Germany, England, is egging this on, including the recent proposal by Chancellor Merz to rapidly include the Ukraine in some form into the European Union, including a military clause that the European Union would protect them were they to become part of it. Excuse me. This would mean that any conflict between the Ukraine and Russia would immediately involve the EU. Now, I don't know what's wrong with Chancellor Merz that he even would propose such a thing, but he's definitely done it. But in any case, we're on the cusp of a catastrophe. There were warnings from Sergei Karaganov some years ago that the Europeans are so blind in their attempt to ruin Russia, as Baerbock has called it at times, that they're willing to attack Russia, which is the most modern nuclear power on the planet, as if these nuclear weapons didn't really exist. And now, while Karaganov may have been sort of an extreme position in the Russian debate, for sure, when President Putin changed the Russian nuclear doctrine just last fall from the fact that Russia would use nuclear weapons only if the existence of the territory of the Russian Federation would be threatened, and he changed that to if there is an existential threat to the Russian Federation by a non-nuclear power, which is backed by a nuclear power, then Russia would have the right to use nuclear weapons first. Now, that's the official Russian doctrine that came out last fall. And the Europeans basically pretend that that didn't happen, that none of this has happened. You know, for example, there were in the recent period several Ukrainian drones launched clearly over the airspace of the Nordic countries, probably Finland and the Baltic countries, which clearly is read by Russia that this is support coming from a NATO member country for the Ukrainian attack. And again, it's led to some very serious warnings by people who cannot be regarded as extreme, but who represent middle-of-the-road Russian policy, such as Russian Foreign Minister Ryabkov and the Russian representative at the OSCE in Vienna, Polyansky. Both of them are kind of centrist moderates. But they both said that it may be too late to prevent such a strike because the Europeans are continuously making these kinds of provocations, and that Russia would have to respond. See, now it's one thing for Medvedev to come out and say that stuff because he's a loudmouth anyway. And it's another thing for Lavrov or Putin or Peskov to come out and say, you're kind of taxing our patience, because they're sitting on the edge of the decision for a full-scale invasion of Kyiv. But when moderates come out and say the same thing, that means something. Now, Scott Ritter, who I like, I know some of you like him, a former UN weapons inspector, very knowledgeable about these things, thinks that a big hit on a European decision-making center is going to come. Not just the one that just happened with Kyiv. Maybe in Poland. Maybe in Romania. Maybe in the Baltic countries. He thinks this is going to happen to basically teach Europe a lesson to wake up and stop provoking a nuclear power. Now, if that happens, all hell will break loose and we'll be in uncharted water for sure. But the present militarization going on in Germany And the European Union is evoking some of the worst memories of 80 years ago. And it's not just Germany, but all the countries who are involved in this present militarization. So we're sitting on the edge of a catastrophe. I can only say if people aren't waking up, it's high time. It is high time that they do. Now, I got more to say, but we've only got a couple of minutes left. Our Memorial Day sale is going on, 15% off on all of our supplements. 15%. A lot of people wait for this time to take advantage of this. You just go to forbiddendoctor.com and go to where the supplements are. Make your order, and the discount is automatically figured in. There is no stacking, because some of you are on a discount basis anyway because of memberships. So there's no stacking of discounts. It's just a flat 15% discount, and it goes until tomorrow, I think. So if you're waiting to get our product at discount prices, now is the time to do so. And then also the half price special, I think there's a couple of spots this week that are open for it. You would call the office, 801-523-1890, 801-523-1890, make an appointment. We're going to talk for half an hour anyway for a consultation. I need to know what's bothering you. I need to know where it hurts, how long it's been there, your accident, trauma history, all these kinds of things, to figure out if I think I can help you. Up to that point, there's no charge. And if you decide you don't want me to take care of you and you just want to go your own way, that's fine. We'll still be friends. If you want me to take care of you, then there'll be a charge, and you can plan on staying another hour to an hour and a half. Follow-up visits are very, very brief. But the first initial care requires pre and post x-rays. I need to know what's wrong, and then after I've taken care of you, I need to know that I got it and that there isn't something else in there that needs to be gotten out of there. But we've seen a lot of people lately with this benefit, and a lot of out-of-state people from various parts of the country coming in to take advantage of this. So that's going to do it for today. I'll catch up for more of this tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for this morning right now. And then I will save that recording. And then I don't know what the station has planned at 9 o'clock. But when my microphone here says 9 o'clock, I'm going to disconnect. And hopefully they've got something planned to go in behind that. And I'm going to end the stream. Thank you for those who were participating. I'll see you all on the stream tomorrow. Keep your wits about you. Be careful out there.